And I think we should probably start with Bayern. They had the Friday game against Augsburg. And that game was probably more complicated than they wanted it to be. Ultimately, it got decided because of the second yellow card, right? That
Hmm.
foul on Kane, and lots of talk back and forward about that particular situation. Yellow cards are not reviewable, so it is what it is. Have to add to that, like I think just moments later, Kane was brought down in the box, and the referee didn't give that. And we both, you and I, basically agreed that if there's ever been a makeup call in the Bundesliga, that's it. Where the referee like tries to balance out one bad decision with yet another bad decision. I personally hate that, but they do it. Um, but it did take that sending off, in my opinion, for Bayern to really to see off Augsburg. And that is probably the most positive thing about this game was the result. They really have to grind out results at the moment because the injury list is just so long. The entire backline is out injured, right? They added Ito to the injury list last week. And then of course in the second half, Jamal Musiala had to come off with what looked at first just a hamstring injury, and you can see it when that shot happens, when he goes down, and a couple other Bayern players walk up to him, and you can see him say, like, touching
Hmm.
the back of his leg, and he says hamstring, right? Like right away, he knew. Unfortunately, hamstrings come in different categories, and then he had to be helped off the field. And I think we all said, like, look, that's probably a tear. And I think it's been confirmed now, right? 8 weeks for him. To which I said, wow, like that's not that long. And then you said, well, that's to the end of the season, which it is. I mean, it is. That's
Yeah.
June 7th. If we go from today, and that is the end of the season. That is past the Champions League final. Like his season is over, Stefan.
Yeah, his season is over, and it's a real shame for Musiala, because obviously Bayern are still in the Champions League. They're still pushing for the
Yeah.
Bundesliga. They're still technically, leading that. If you still want to call it a race, we'll maybe get onto Leverkusen if we have time into the show. But yeah, it's a race that both these teams seem to be kind of stumbling towards the finish line.
Yeah.
Um, and Musiala was crucial in this game. Obviously, we talked about. You said, it was a game where they had to kind of really just kind of go over the line, and I completely agree with you. It wasn't classic Bayern. It wasn't exciting for Bayern fans. In fact, it was probably a nightmare due to the fact that Musiala went off with an injury. But it was a good win, I think, for Bayern. It was a game where I actually found myself quite impressed with them by the end of the match, just
Mhm.
because things weren't really going their way. They had a number of injuries. Musiala then goes out halfway through the match, which obviously is a huge blow because he's literally missing. But even just kind of the emotional blow of seeing your best player walk off the pitch like that
Yeah.
seeps into the team as a whole. And yeah, you're right. You could tell from the get go that there was something wrong because he actually went down like in the Augsburg box, and then Bayern actually attacked, and he still didn't get up. So you're like, he was actually like hindering his
Mhm.
own team's play. So it was pretty bad. Um, but no, I mean, I think it was a good game. Augsburg are absolutely no, they're no shrugs. They're a very good team right now. They then obviously go ahead through a goal from Giannalis, a fantastic goal, I thought, where he really turned Konrad Leimer inside out. He scores half hour at the half hour mark, and at that point, it looked like a game where Augsburg actually had the measure of this Bayern team. But
Mhm.
Musiala being Musiala, he picks up a cutback from Leroy Sané just for half time, and his first shot's blocked. But then he does something that I think very few players can do, and something that Musiala's so good at is where he takes the ball again and he makes some space for himself in the box to kind of get that shot away. And you know, I guess from that point on, because he obviously then goes off like 10 minutes into the second half, and then becomes this match where you're kind of waiting to see who's going to step up for Bayern Munich in Musiala's absence. And I think that'll be the question
Mhm.
for them kind of this week, obviously against Inter Milan, but for the rest of the season, who will be the guy who's going to step into Musiala's shoes and kind of be their key player for them? Thomas Müller obviously came in, as a lifelike replacement for him in the match. We had Leroy Sané on the left hand side, who technically didn't get a goal. I think it went down to an own goal
Yeah.
with his shot, who I
Which
thought
I
was
disagree
okay.
with, by the way. I think that should be a Sané goal. That's just me.
Yeah, I think it technically comes down to whether it was
Mhm.
on target or not, and I guess it technically wasn't. But I know what you mean. Um, but the problem with Leroy Sané is that and we talked about this on our subscriber chat during the game. He has that wonderful one-on-one chance when Augsburg are pushing in the second half, and he fluffs his lines. He just hits it straight at the goalkeeper. And I could have put my mortgage on him missing that goal, and it's just something that seems to be a problem with Leroy Sané. It's something I actually mentioned on social media, like saying in some alternate future or some alternate universe, there's a scenario in which a youth coach takes a look at Leroy Sané, and instead of basically pushing him out wide because he can't finish, he actually says, "No, I'm going to turn you into a striker, but you're going to spend the summer learning how to score goals." And he becomes a world class player because he knows how to finish. And that's the kind of frustrating thing with Leroy Sané. If he could finish as well as Musiala, for example, he'd be a world class player. I've got no doubt about it. He would
Mm,
be Arjen Robben, he would be Frank Ribery, he would be, whoever else, Musiala, Thomas Müller. He'd be of that pedigree, in my opinion. But he still has that thing missing in his game. But then you could also maybe, and on the opposite wing, you had Michael Olise, who actually did step up, and he obviously set up the goal for Harry Kane to score the second goal. Um, and I do kind of wonder if maybe Bayern will just kind of turn to him in Musiala's absence. He has consistently been probably their best option in attack outside of Musiala. I know Harry Kane's obviously
mhm.
scored a bucket load of goals, but when it comes to the guy who's creating the chances, in fact, I'd probably say Oliseh's probably been better than Musiala this season, to be honest, in terms of his pure numbers.
Yeah.
So going into this Inter game, I think all eyes will be on what he can do for Bayern, and how he can kind of help them through this match, which is a huge thing to even think about, considering like 8 months ago when he joined the club, there was so many question marks as to whether he could make the step up from Crystal Palace. Did Bayern spend too much
Mm.
money on a player who has, uh, dubious injury past in the Premier League? But no, Oliseh's gone from strength to strength, and we're now at this point at the end of his first season at Bayern where he's now arguably their most important creative player behind Musiala. So I guess we'll have to wait and see how Kompany tackles that Inter Milan game. But if I was a Bayern fan, I'd be hoping that they find some way to get Olise on the ball constantly.
Well, Olise is, I had to do a story for Forbes after the Musiala injury happened, right, on how Bayern can replace him and what it all means. And Olise is second in assists at Bayern Munich with 16. Um, he has 13 goals. That puts him a third behind Musiala, I think, across all competitions, right, in goals. Kane, of course, is first in goals. So, you know, Olise, in my opinion, I mean, he has been such a revelation. They signed him for what, 50 million euros from Crystal Palace. His market value has since grown to 80 million euros. He's top in, according to Transfermarkt, one of the four most valuable players in the league. Deservedly so, in my opinion, as well. Um, he's been such a great find. The problem when you talk about how is he going to he can replace the production, right? And I mean, he has been extremely productive this season. The thing is, though, he's been productive this season with Musiala on the field, so it's really hard to replace a player with a player who's already on there. You can maybe ask him to step up his production a little bit. Um, and I mean, the same will be asked of Leroy Sané, who I think is going to be extremely important as well, and who maybe can fill in that role. The player that's obviously, and that was made official on Saturday, right? Thomas Müller is going to leave Bayern Munich after the Club World Cup. They extended his contract for the Club World Cup, which I think is the right move. If you decide that after the end of the season, this is it to extend for the Club World Cup, to use that as sort of the testimonial makes a lot of sense. For me, the question though is, and I mean, I think he will be pressed into service now because what else are you gonna do? You don't have really another number 10 in your squad, right? So positionally, that is the right replacement for him. But does Thomas Müller have the ability for 8 more weeks to be Thomas Müller, or actually return to be Thomas Müller? Because like this is something that he's really struggled with this year. I mean, the drop off has been, and we see this sometimes. Um, with sports in particular is players are fine and and as they get older, the level of production is usually fine until one moment it isn't anymore, right? And then it seems to fall off the cliff. Like production of older players is fine, 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 good. Sometimes like returns to a really high level and then it just can fall off a cliff. Um, and I wonder if this is what we've been seeing with him this season. And with that in mind, like, does his body and his legs have 8 weeks in them where he can replace Jamal Musiala? Because like he is the only player who can probably fulfill this role 1-to-1. And that's what's going to be asked of him now, because there's no other player in the squad that can play there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's going to be a huge test for Muller. Whether he starts or not, I guess, is the real question. I have a sneaky suspicion that it might actually be someone else in that role. I actually wonder if Kompany might throw Leon Goretzka in that number 10 position. You know, we've kind
Mm.
of seen him kind of play this more attacking role in certain games, and he's kind of played this kind of big lumbering number 8 who's making late runs into the box. You know, he's almost kind of got this kind of alley oop kind of skill with Joshua Kimmich, where Kimmich kind of pulls out to the right wing, and he kind of times his cross into the box for Goretzka to get onto the end of it. Um, you know, and I would be surprised actually if Kompany maybe turns to Goretzka to kind of fill in. Obviously, he doesn't have the same sort of creativity as Musiala. Although, having said that, when he first came through Schalke, he was probably quite very similar to the way that Musiala is now, to be honest with you. Maybe more of a box-to-box player than Musiala, but he's certainly got the technique to create chances. He can thread a pass. He's more than happy dribbling in the final third. And he has kind of done a lot better this season when he has been kind of given these opportunities to once again prove himself. So, yeah, there are options for Bayern. None of them are quite Musiala, if you will.
Mm.
You know, obviously Coman's out as well, so you know you're looking at that bench and there's very few options. It really is just probably comes down to Gnabry, Goretzka, or Thomas Müller, and we'll kind of have to wait and see which one it'll be. But yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens with that one. But it's a huge blow to Bayern. There's no doubt about it. So I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, this Inter, I made the statement on the Substack chat a few weeks ago that I kind of regret now, that I think Bayern are going to beat Inter. Um, I'm not sure anymore, Stefan. They're very good. Like, I mean, Inter is a very good team, and I think if without all the injury concerns, Bayern would probably get past them. But this has gotten so hard now. You are playing without a defense. You're playing without your number one goalkeeper. I'm a big believer, but he's learning on the fly, isn't he? These are big occasions that he now is needs to learn really quickly. And in fairness, that happened to Manuel Neuer. Manuel Neuer also had to learn on the fly with Schalke when he first broke into professional football. And remember, this was a very different Schalke side than it is today. They were really good then. Played Champions League football and all that. So you know that these were high pressure moments, and this is the best way for a goalkeeper to learn. But it's it's not just that he has to learn in this really difficult moment, but he has to also learn with like a back line that is essentially Kim and Kim on one Achilles and Dyer. And that is so very difficult. And so I'm actually now really worried about this Inter fixture for them, because I think they're going to face a team. I think Lautaro Martinez is scheduled to be back, right? He's not playing his best season, but no, he's a really good footballer. They have Thuram, who we all know from the Bundesliga, who played for a Gladbach side where they often beat Bayern. And this team is just, watching a few of these Inter games, you just think like, okay, this is a really disciplined, really good football team, and they're meeting a Bayern Munich team that is sort of limping towards the end of the season. And I think this is going to really be really tough task.
Yeah, it will be. I do wonder if Company might be tempted to kind of change his tactics ever so slightly and go with almost like a
Mm.
back three with Kim, Dyer, and maybe Stanisic. And then obviously he can play someone like Guerrero on the left wing, and then Kimmich as a right wing back if he wants, or Conrad Leimer there, I suppose, could play that role too. And that allows him to kind of shuffle the pack ever so slightly and bring in allow someone like Leroy Sané or Michael Olise to play that kind of more central role. Um, and they can kind of fill in for Musiala in that regard without the need to have two out and out wingers. Um, And then you could obviously bring in Goretzka in there as well, because you're right. It's not just the fact that Bayern don't really have anyone to replace Musiala. It's the fact that they don't have anyone to replace Upamecano. They don't have anyone to replace Davies. They don't have anyone to replace Neuer, even Pavlovic. Guys like that. Like, they're missing so many big players this season. And that bench against Augsburg was really, there wasn't a huge amount to work with there. To be honest with you, it says quite a lot that obviously Thomas Müller is a legend at Bayern Munich, but the club have obviously deemed him no longer good enough to play for Bayern. But he was the player that Kompany had to turn to replace Musiala in this match. So yeah, you're right. Bayern are kind of really creaking at the sides here, and it's going to be a real test of Kompany's ability as a head coach to see how he gets past and beats a very good Inter Milan side.
Yeah, very good Inter Milan side with a lot of former Bayern Munich players. Jan Sommer in goal, Benjamin Pavard. Yeah, it's going to be exciting to see those two, and I'm actually looking forward to this.